What if the reason you want to give up on English is the same reason you're afraid to believe in love? I came to America feeling lost, misunderstood, and honestly not good enough, until I met someone from a completely different generation who changed everything. This is not just a love story. It's a slow, real English journey about mistakes, courage, family, and one question that might quietly change your life forever. The question that broke me. What if the real reason you keep pausing your English learning isn't because you're busy, or tired, or not good at languages, but because somewhere deep inside, you're afraid of being seen, misunderstood, or even judged? I didn't realize this at first. I thought I just had a bad memory. I blamed my accent. I blamed my schedule. I blamed everything except the one thing quietly controlling my life, fear. Let me take you back to a cold morning in the United States. The kind of cold that doesn't just touch your skin, it sits inside your chest. I was standing outside a small coffee shop, holding my phone, rehearsing a simple sentence in English. Hi, can I get a coffee? Sounds easy, right? But my brain was acting like I was about to give a speech in front of 1,000 people. My heart was racing. My palms were sweating. And the worst part? I knew exactly what I wanted to say, but I still felt stuck. If you've ever been there, you know that feeling. It's not about vocabulary. It's not about grammar. It's like your mind builds a wall right when you need it most. Science actually explains this pretty well. When your brain senses social risk, like speaking a foreign language, it activates the amygdala, the part responsible for fear. And suddenly, even a simple sentence feels like danger. Your brain isn't trying to help you speak better. It's trying to protect you from embarrassment. Which is kind of ironic, because in trying to protect you, it keeps you silent. And silence, over time, becomes your comfort zone. That morning, I almost walked away. I almost told myself, it's okay, I'll try again tomorrow. But deep down, I knew tomorrow would look exactly the same. So I stood there, frozen between two choices, speak imperfect English, or say nothing and stay invisible. And then something strange happened. Right next to me, a voice said slowly, clearly, "Take your time. No rush." I turned my head. There was someone standing there, older, calm, and oddly patient. Not the kind of person you'd expect to notice someone like me. Not the kind of person I thought would ever become part of my story. At that moment, I didn't know their name. I didn't know their age. I didn't know that this one small moment would lead to a question that would completely break the way I see love, language, and even myself. But I felt something. Not confidence. Not yet. Just permission. Permission to be slow. Permission to be imperfect. Permission to try. So I walked into the coffee shop. I looked at the cashier, took a breath, and said, "Hi, can I get one coffee, please?" It wasn't perfect. My pronunciation was off. My voice was shaky. But something surprising happened. The world didn't end. The cashier smiled. "Sure. What kind of coffee?" And just like that, a conversation began. Not a perfect one. Not a fluent one. But a real one. That's the moment most people don't talk about when it comes to learning English. It's not the grammar books. It's not the vocabulary lists. It's these tiny, uncomfortable, human moments that slowly build your confidence. Each time you speak, your brain rewires itself. Neuroscientists call this neuroplasticity. The more you practice, even imperfectly, the stronger those language pathways become. In simple words, your brain learns by doing, not by waiting. But here's the twist. That day wasn't just about ordering coffee. That day was the beginning of something much more complicated. Because the person who told me take your time didn't just help me speak English. They stayed. They asked me questions. Simple ones. Where are you from? How long have you been here? Do you like it here? And I answered, slowly, awkwardly, sometimes incorrectly. But they listened. Not like they were correcting me. Not like they were judging me. They listened like every word mattered. And that feeling is rare. Especially when you're learning a new language. Especially when you already feel like you don't belong. Days passed. Then weeks. We kept meeting at the same coffee shop. We kept talking, slow English, simple words, lots of pauses. But something strange started happening. The conversations got easier. The silences got shorter. And the connection got deeper. That's when the question first appeared in my mind. A quiet, uncomfortable question. One I didn't want to ask. One I tried to ignore. What are we doing? Because here's the part one haven't told you yet. There was something different about us. Something obvious. Something impossible to ignore. An age gap. A big one. At first, I told myself it didn't matter. We were just talking. Just practicing English. Just being friendly. But the human brain loves patterns. It loves labels. It loves putting things into categories that feel safe and normal. And this? This didn't fit any category I was comfortable with. I started noticing things. The way people looked at us. The small pauses when we sat together. The unspoken questions in the air. And slowly, that fear I felt about speaking English, it came back. But this time, it wasn't about language. It was about judgment. About society. About the invisible rules we all pretend don't exist until we break them. I found myself overthinking everything. Is this wrong? What will people say? Am I just confused? Or the biggest question of all. Can love really ignore age? That question stayed in my mind like a quiet echo. Not loud enough to scare me away. But strong enough to make me doubt everything. And here's the truth most people won't tell you. Learning English is not just about language. It changes how you think. It changes how you connect. It opens doors you didn't even know existed. And sometimes, it leads you into situations you never expected. Situations that challenge your beliefs. Your comfort zone. Your identity. That coffee shop? It wasn't just where I learned to say one coffee, please. It became the place where I started questioning everything I thought I knew about love. And I didn't realize it yet. But I was about to enter the most confusing, beautiful, and terrifying chapter of my life. A chapter where every conversation would matter. Every word would carry weight. And every silence would say more than I was ready to hear. Because the next time we met, something changed. Something small. But powerful enough to shift everything. And that's where this story really begins. My life in America begins. Have you ever landed somewhere new, and suddenly felt like your personality disappeared? Not your passport. Not your name. Your personality. That was me when I first arrived in the United States. Back home, I was talkative. I had opinions. I could joke, argue, explain, even comfort people with the right words at the right time. But the moment I stepped into America, something strange happened. I became quiet. Not because I wanted to, but because I didn't know how to be myself in English. You see, people think learning English is about translating words. But it's not. It's about translating who you are. And that's a much harder job. I still remember my first week. Everything looked like a movie. Wide roads, tall buildings, people walking fast like they all had somewhere important to be. Even small things felt different, the way people smiled at strangers, the way they said "How are you?" without expecting a real answer. At first, I thought, wow, this is exciting. Then reality slowly whispered, you don't belong here, yet. And that yet felt very far away. The weather didn't help either. Cold mornings. Dry air. A sky that looked beautiful but felt distant. Back home, the air was warm, familiar, almost like a hug. Here, it felt like a test. Even ordering food became a challenge. One time, I walked into a fast food place, stared at the menu for 5 minutes, and still didn't understand half of it. Words I had learned before suddenly looked unfamiliar. Combo, meal, upgrade. My brain froze. The cashier looked at me. People behind me were waiting. That pressure again, that invisible clock ticking louder and louder. So I did what many people do when they panic. I chose the safest option. Number 1, please. I didn't even know what number 1 was. But it felt safer than speaking. And that's how fear slowly builds a habit. You stop trying new sentences. You stop asking questions. You stay inside the small circle of words you already know. Psychologists call this avoidance behavior. It feels good in the moment because it reduces anxiety. But over time, it limits your growth. In simple words, you feel safe, but you stay stuck. And I was very, very stuck. At home, I spent hours studying English. Watching videos. Repeating phrases. Writing down vocabulary. I knew the rules. I understood grammar. But outside? I couldn't use it. That gap between knowing and speaking is where most learners give up. And I almost did. There were nights I sat alone, scrolling through my phone, thinking, maybe I'm just not meant to be here. Maybe my English will never be good enough. Maybe I should go back. If you've ever had those thoughts, you're not alone. Your brain loves certainty. It prefers familiar discomfort over unfamiliar challenge. So when things get hard, it tries to pull you back to what feels safe, even if that safe place is smaller. But here's something interesting. Studies in language learning show that emotional connection plays a huge role in how fast you improve. When you feel relaxed, supported, or even curious, your brain absorbs language more effectively. When you feel stressed or judged, everything slows down. And that's exactly why that person from the coffee shop mattered more than I realized. Because in a world where everything felt fast, confusing, and slightly overwhelming, they were slow. They spoke clearly. Not like they were talking to a child, but like they respected my pace. Tell me about your hometown, they said one day. I paused. I searched for words. My hometown is small but very warm. Warm. That word came out naturally. And for a moment, I didn't feel lost. I felt understood. That's the magic of simple English. You don't need perfect sentences to create real connection. You just need courage to try, and someone patient enough to listen. We started meeting more often. Same coffee shop. Same quiet corner. Same slow conversations. Sometimes we talked about food. Sometimes about weather. Sometimes about nothing important at all. But every conversation felt like practice. Not just for English. For confidence. For being seen again. I began noticing changes. I didn't rehearse sentences as much. I didn't panic when I forgot a word. Instead, I used other words. Or gestures. Or even silence. And surprisingly, communication still happened. That's when I learned a powerful truth. Fluency is not about speaking perfectly. It's about being comfortable with imperfection. And that lesson didn't come from a textbook. It came from real life. From real conversations. From one person who didn't rush me. But here's where things start to shift. Because as my English improved, so did my awareness. I started noticing details I had ignored before. The way they paused before answering. The way they smiled when I tried a new word. The way they seemed different from everyone else around us. And then one day, during a casual conversation, something slipped. A small detail. But enough to make my brain stop. They mentioned a year. A year that didn't match my expectations. A year that suddenly made me realize. They were much older than I thought. Not just a little older. A different generation. I laughed at first. I thought I misunderstood. Maybe it was my English again. Maybe I heard it wrong. But no. I didn't. And suddenly, all the moments we shared started to look different. The conversations. The connection. The comfort. Everything felt complicated. Because now, it wasn't just about learning English in America anymore. It was about understanding something deeper. Something society doesn't always accept easily. Something that makes people uncomfortable. Something that made me uncomfortable. An age gap. A real one. And just like that, a new question quietly entered my mind. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just persistent. Is this okay? At that moment, I didn't have the answer. I only had curiosity. Confusion. And a strange feeling I couldn't ignore. Because the next time we met, I wasn't just practicing English anymore. I was trying to understand what this connection really meant. And whether I was ready to face what comes with it. The first meeting. Have you ever replayed a simple moment over and over again in your head, wondering how something so ordinary quietly changed your life? Not a big event. Not a dramatic scene. Just a normal day that didn't stay normal. That's exactly what my first real meeting with them became. At the time, I thought it was just another conversation practice. Another slow English session. Another small step in my journey of learning English in the United States. But looking back now, that moment was the beginning of everything. Let me show you why. It was a late afternoon. Not too cold, not too warm. The kind of weather that makes people stay a little longer outside without realizing it. The coffee shop was quieter than usual. Fewer people. Less noise. More space for thoughts. I almost didn't go in that day. I told myself, you practiced enough this week. You can rest. But something inside me, maybe curiosity, maybe habit, pushed me to open that door. And there they were. Sitting in the same corner. Same calm posture. Same relaxed energy. Like they weren't waiting, but also not surprised to see me. Hey, they said, slowly, clearly. That word again. Simple. But somehow, grounding. I sat down. There was a short silence. Not awkward. Not comfortable. Just, new. Because this time, I knew something I didn't know before. Their age. Or at least, a part of it. And suddenly, my brain started doing what brains do best, overthinking. Every detail felt louder. The way they spoke. The way they listened. The small pauses between sentences. I started comparing. Is this normal? Are we supposed to be this comfortable? Why does this feel different? And here's the funny part. When you overthink, your English doesn't get better. It gets worse. Because now, you're not just translating language. You're translating emotions. And emotions are messy. I tried to focus. They asked me a simple question. How was your day? Easy question, right? But my brain didn't answer. Instead, it started analyzing. Should I sound casual? Should I speak more formally? Do I smile? Do I act the same as before? And just like that, I froze. Again. But this time, it wasn't fear of speaking English. It was fear of being misunderstood. Not because of language. Because of meaning. They noticed. Of course they did. People who truly listen always notice. You're thinking too much, they said, gently. I laughed. Because it was true. Yes. A little, I replied. A little? That was an understatement. But something about that moment shifted the energy. It broke the tension. It reminded me of something simple but powerful. You don't need perfect English to be real. You just need to be honest. So I tried again. My day was okay. But I think too much today. They smiled. That's okay. Thinking is not a problem. But sometimes feeling is easier. Feeling is easier. That sentence stayed with me. Because in language learning, we're taught to think. Grammar rules. Sentence structure. Vocabulary lists. But real communication? It's not about thinking perfectly. It's about feeling clearly. And for the first time since I arrived in America, I stopped trying to be correct. I started trying to be present. We talked longer that day. Not about anything important. Just life. Small things. Daily routines. Food. Music. Weather. But something deeper was happening underneath those simple topics. We were building something. Not fast. Not intense. But steady. And then, in the middle of a conversation about music, they said something unexpected. You listen to old songs, right? I paused. Yes, sometimes, I said. They nodded. I like songs from my time. My time. That phrase hit differently now. Before, it sounded casual. Now, it sounded like a reminder. A quiet line between us. A difference we couldn't ignore anymore. I felt it. That small shift. That moment where curiosity turns into awareness. And awareness turns into questions. I didn't ask them directly. Not yet. But my mind was already moving. How big is the gap? Does it matter? Why do I even care? And here's something interesting about the human brain. When something challenges your beliefs, it doesn't reject it immediately. It studies it. It circles around it. It tries to understand before deciding. And that's exactly what I was doing. Studying this connection. This unexpected comfort. This strange feeling that didn't match the rules I thought I knew. We kept talking. But now, every sentence carried a little more weight. Every pause felt a little longer. Not because something was wrong, but because something was changing. At one point, they asked, "Do you feel comfortable talking with me?" Such a simple question. But it felt like a test. Not of my English. Of my honesty. I could have said something safe. Something neutral. Something easy. But instead, I said, "Yes. I feel comfortable. But also confused." There it was. My truth. Imperfect English. Perfect meaning. They didn't laugh. They didn't look surprised. They just nodded slowly. "Confusion is a good place to start," they said. A good place to start. Not a problem. Not a mistake. A beginning. That idea changed something in me. Because all this time, I thought confusion meant I was failing. In English. In life. In understanding. But maybe. Confusion just means you're learning something new. Something your brain hasn't fully processed yet. Something that might be important. We left the coffee shop together that day. Not in a romantic way. Not in a dramatic way. Just walking. Side by side. Talking slowly. About simple things. But inside? Nothing felt simple anymore. Because now, this wasn't just about practicing English. This was about connection. Real connection. The kind that doesn't follow rules. The kind that makes you question everything. And as we stood outside, about to go our separate ways, they said one more thing. "See you, tomorrow?" Tomorrow. Such a small word. But it carried a decision. Continue, or step back. Stay curious, or return to safety. I smiled. A little unsure. A little nervous. But also, a little excited. Yes, see you tomorrow. And just like that, without realizing it, I chose to continue. Not just the conversations. Not just the English practice. But the story. A story that was slowly becoming more complicated. More meaningful. And more real than I ever expected. Because the next day, I would finally ask the question I had been avoiding. And the answer? It would change everything. Awkward conversations. Have you ever tried to say something simple, and somehow turned it into the most awkward sentence of your life? Not because you didn't know the words, but because you suddenly cared too much about how those words would be heard. That was me the next day. Walking toward the coffee shop, repeating one question in my head like it was a dangerous secret. How old are you? Simple question. 4 words. But in that moment, it felt heavier than anything I had ever tried to say in English. Because this time, it wasn't about grammar. It was about meaning. About crossing a line I didn't fully understand yet. I walked in. They were already there. Same corner. Same calm presence. Same quiet energy that somehow made everything feel slower and clearer. Hey, they said. Hi, I replied. And just like that, the usual conversation started again. How are you? I'm good, and you? I'm good too. Safe. Predictable. Easy. But underneath those simple exchanges, my mind was racing. Ask now. No, wait. Maybe later. What if it's rude? What if it changes everything? This is something most English learners don't talk about. Sometimes, the hardest sentences are not the longest ones. They're the ones that carry emotion. Psychologists explain this as emotional load. When a sentence has personal meaning, your brain processes it differently. It becomes slower, more cautious, more sensitive to possible outcomes. In simple words, you're not just speaking. You're risking something. And that risk makes everything harder. We talked about random things for a while. Weather. Food. Even a funny story about how I once misunderstood the word dessert and thought it meant something completely different. They laughed. I laughed. It felt normal again. And that's when I realized something important. Comfort can be dangerous. Not because it's bad, but because it makes you avoid difficult truths. If I stayed in that comfort, I would never ask the question. I would never understand what this connection really was. So I took a breath, paused, and said it. Slowly. Carefully. How old are you? There it was. No perfect timing. No dramatic build-up. Just a simple question, finally spoken. They didn't react immediately. Not shocked. Not uncomfortable. Just thoughtful. Then they answered. Clearly. Calmly. Honestly. And in that moment, everything shifted. Not because of the number itself, but because of what it represented. A gap. A real one. Not something small you can ignore. Not something you can explain away easily. A difference that society notices. A difference people talk about. A difference that makes others question your choices, even before you fully understand them yourself. I didn't know how to respond. So I did what many people do when they feel overwhelmed. I smiled. Nodded. And said, "Oh, okay." But inside, nothing was okay. My brain started working again. Fast. Too fast. What does this mean? Why do I feel like this matters? Should I stop this? Is this wrong? And here's where things get interesting. Because while my mind was trying to analyze everything, my feelings didn't change. I still felt comfortable. I still felt heard. I still felt connected. That contradiction is powerful. When logic and emotion don't agree, your brain struggles. It looks for answers. It searches for rules. It tries to make sense of something that doesn't fit. And that's exactly where I was. Caught between what I felt and what I thought I was supposed to feel. They noticed the change. Of course they did. You're quiet, they said. I'm thinking, I replied. They nodded. That's okay. Again, that patience. That calm acceptance. No pressure. No judgment. Just space. And that space allowed something important to happen. I didn't run away. I didn't shut down. I stayed. We kept talking. But now, the conversation was different. Not heavier. Not uncomfortable. Just more real. We talked about time. About life stages. About how people grow at different speeds. Their English was simple. Clear. Intentional. Not trying to impress. Just trying to communicate. And that made it easier for me to respond. I think people judge fast, I said slowly. Yes, they replied. People see outside first. Outside first. That phrase stayed in my mind. Because it's true. People notice age. Appearance. Differences. Before they ever understand the story behind them. Before they see the connection. Before they feel what you feel. And suddenly, I understood something deeper. This wasn't just about us. This was about how the world sees relationships. How society creates invisible rules. How we follow those rules, even when they don't match our reality. And here's the part that surprised me the most. Talking about this, in English, made it easier. Because my English wasn't perfect, I couldn't over-explain. I had to keep things simple. Honest. Direct. I feel confused. But also comfortable, I said. They smiled. That's honest, they replied. Honest. Not correct. Not perfect. Just honest. That moment taught me something no textbook ever could. Language is not just a tool for communication. It's a mirror. It shows you what you really think. What you really feel. Especially when you don't have enough words to hide behind. We sat there for a long time. Not rushing. Not forcing anything. Just existing in that space between understanding and uncertainty. And strangely, it didn't feel wrong. It felt human. Before we left, they said something I didn't expect. We don't need to decide everything now. I looked at them. They continued. We can just learn. Slowly. Learn. That word again. Not define. Not label. Not judge. Just learn. And suddenly, everything felt lighter. Because maybe I didn't need answers yet. Maybe I didn't need to understand everything immediately. Maybe it was okay to stay in that space of curiosity. Of confusion. Of slow discovery. We walked out of the coffee shop together again. Same path. Same quiet steps. But something inside me had changed. Not completely. Not clearly. But enough to move forward. Because now, I wasn't just practicing English conversations anymore. I was having real ones. The kind that make you think. The kind that make you question. The kind that slowly change who you are. And as I went home that day, one thought stayed in my mind. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just steady. If this is confusing, why does it also feel right? That question didn't scare me anymore. It intrigued me. Because deep down, I knew this story was not going to be simple. And the more we talked, the more complicated it would become. Because the next step? It wouldn't be just about us. It would involve something even harder to face. Other people. Their opinions. Their judgments. Their expectations. And that's where things would truly be tested. The age gap reality. Have you ever felt something real, but the moment other people noticed it, it suddenly felt complicated? Not because it changed, but because they saw it. That's when the age gap stopped being just a number and started becoming a reality. Up until that point, everything existed in a quiet bubble. A coffee shop. Slow conversations. Simple English. Two people learning about each other without pressure, without labels. Inside that bubble, things felt natural. But bubbles don't last forever. Eventually, the outside world finds a way in. And when it does, it brings opinions. It brings assumptions. It brings judgment. It started small. A look. You know that look. The one that lasts half a second too long. Not openly rude. Not directly offensive. Just curious. Curious in a way that feels like a question you didn't agree to answer. We were sitting at our usual table, talking about something simple, the food, I think. I was explaining a dish from my hometown, struggling to find the right English words. It is spicy, but also sweet, and very warm feeling, I said. Comfort food, they replied. Yes. Comfort food, I repeated, smiling. That small moment of learning, of connection, it felt good. But then I noticed it. Two people at the next table. They weren't listening to our conversation. But they were watching. Quick glances. Whispers. A small smile that didn't feel friendly. And suddenly, I became aware. Not of my English. Not of my words. But of us. That awareness hit differently. Before, I worried about saying the wrong sentence. Now, I worried about being the wrong story. That shift is powerful. Because when you feel judged, your brain doesn't just protect your language. It protects your identity. Psychologists call this social evaluation threat. When you think others are judging you, your stress level increases, your confidence drops. And your behavior changes, even if no one says anything directly. In simple terms, you start editing yourself. And I did exactly that. I spoke less. I laughed less. I became careful. Too careful. I chose safer words. Shorter sentences. Less eye contact. It was like I was slowly disappearing again. And the worst part? No. I'm just tired, I replied. That was easier than telling the truth. Because the truth sounded complicated. I feel people are watching us. Even in English, that sentence felt heavy. But silence doesn't solve anything. It just delays the moment you have to face it. So they asked again. What are you thinking? And this time, I didn't avoid it. I think people see us and think something, I said slowly. There it was. Not perfect grammar, but clear meaning. They didn't look surprised. They didn't look uncomfortable. They just nodded. Yes, they said. People always think something. Always. That word landed hard. Because it meant this wasn't temporary. This wasn't just one moment. This would be part of our reality. Everywhere. Every time. And suddenly, my mind went further. Beyond the coffee shop. Beyond strangers. To something more personal. What about friends? What about family? What about the future? That's when the age gap stopped being abstract. It became real life. Real consequences. Real questions. And here's the thing no one tells you about situations like this. It's not the difference itself that's hardest. It's the reaction to the difference. Because when you're alone, you can define your own meaning. But when others get involved, they bring their own definitions, their own beliefs, their own limits. And those limits can feel like walls. I looked at them. Really looked. Not just as the person who helped me with English. Not just as someone kind and patient. But as someone from a different generation. Different experiences. Different timeline. Different expectations. And I asked myself something I had been avoiding. Can this actually work? Not emotionally. Logically. Realistically. And my brain did what it always does. It searched for problems. It imagined scenarios. It predicted difficulties. That's how the human mind works. It's designed to protect you by preparing for the worst. But sometimes, that protection becomes a barrier. Because while my brain was building a list of reasons why this might not work, my heart stayed quiet. Not arguing. Not explaining. Just present. And that contrast made everything harder. Because if something feels wrong, it's easy to walk away. If something feels right, it's easy to stay. But when something feels right and looks wrong to others, that's where the real challenge begins. We kept talking that day. But the tone had changed. Not negative. Just deeper. More aware. More honest. I think people don't understand fast, I said. Yes, they replied. Understanding takes time. Time. That word again. It showed up in everything. Language. Connection. Growth. Maybe even love. But time also brings pressure. Because the longer something continues, the more real it becomes. The harder it is to ignore. And the harder it is to walk away. Before we left, I asked one more question. Not directly. Not clearly. But enough. Do you think this is okay? I didn't define this. I didn't need to. They understood. They paused. Looked at me. And said something I didn't expect. It depends on what you feel when no one is watching. That sentence stayed with me long after we left. Because it shifted everything. It moved the focus away from society. Away from judgment. Back to something simpler. Something more honest. What do you feel when it's just you? No audience. No opinions. No pressure. Just you. That question is uncomfortable. Because it removes all excuses. You can't blame others. You can't hide behind expectations. You have to face your own truth. And that truth? It's not always clear. It's not always easy. But it's always there. That night, I went home and sat in silence. No phone. No distractions. Just thinking. Replaying conversations. Replaying moments. Trying to separate fear from feeling. And slowly, one realization started to form. Not complete. Not final. But enough to move forward. Maybe the problem wasn't the age gap. Maybe the problem was my fear of what that gap meant to others. And if that was true, then the next step wouldn't be easy. Because facing strangers is one thing. Facing people who care about you? That's something else entirely. Because the next challenge wouldn't come from a coffee shop. It would come from closer. From voices that matter more. From opinions that are harder to ignore. From people who would ask questions I wasn't ready to answer. And that's where everything would be tested. Not just the connection. But my courage. My honesty. And everything I thought I understood about love. Learning love and language. Have you ever noticed how learning English feels a lot like falling in love? At first, everything is confusing. Nothing makes sense. You doubt yourself. You feel slow. You feel embarrassed. And yet, something keeps pulling you forward. That's exactly where I was. Standing in the middle of two journeys I never expected to connect, learning English, and learning how to love someone I wasn't supposed to. And the strange part? They started teaching me the same lessons. Not from books. Not from rules. But from experience. Let me explain. When you first learn English, you want everything to be perfect. Perfect grammar. Perfect pronunciation. Perfect sentences. You think, if I just learn enough, I will be confident. But that's not how it works. Because confidence doesn't come from perfection. It comes from repetition and acceptance of mistakes. Love works the same way. At the beginning, you want certainty. Clear answers. Clear labels. Clear future. You think, if I understand everything, I will feel safe. But again, that's not how it works. Because real connection doesn't grow from certainty. It grows from showing up, even when things are unclear. And that realization hit me one afternoon in the coffee shop. We weren't talking about anything serious. Just a normal day. Simple English. Slow pace. Comfortable silence between sentences. And suddenly, I said something without thinking too much. I think. I don't need perfect English to talk with you. They smiled. You don't, they replied. I understand you. That sentence seems simple. But it changed something in me. Because for the first time, I felt understood without being perfect. And that feeling? It's powerful. Neuroscience shows that when we feel understood, our brain releases oxytocin, the connection hormone. It reduces fear, increases trust, and makes learning easier. In simple terms, when you feel safe, you grow faster. And that safety started changing how I learned English. I stopped trying to impress. I stopped overthinking every word. I started focusing on meaning. On feeling. On connection. Instead of asking, is this correct? I started asking, is this real? And something surprising happened. My English improved. Not suddenly. Not magically. But naturally. Because I was using it. Every day. In real conversations. With real emotions. And here's where it gets even more interesting. The same shift started happening in how I saw our connection. Before, I kept asking. Is this right? Is this acceptable? Is this normal? But those questions never gave me peace. They only gave me more doubt. So one day, I tried something different. I asked myself, is this honest? That question felt lighter. Because honesty doesn't depend on rules. It depends on awareness. And my honest answer? Yes, this feels real. Not perfect. Not simple. But real. And that was enough to keep going. We started doing small things together outside the coffee shop. Walking in the park. Visiting a bookstore. Even grocery shopping. Normal life. Simple moments. But each moment became a lesson. Not just in English. In understanding. In patience. In difference. Sometimes, we didn't understand each other immediately. Not because of language. But because of perspective. Different generation. Different experiences. Different ways of seeing the world. For example, one day we talked about technology. I said, everything is fast now. People want quick results. They nodded slowly. In my time, things take longer. People wait more. Wait more. That idea felt almost foreign to me. Because I grew up in a world of speed. Instant messages. Instant answers. Instant reactions. But they came from a world where time moved differently. And suddenly, I understood something deeper. Our difference wasn't just age. It was rhythm. Two people living at different speeds, trying to meet in the middle. And that's not easy. Because when rhythms don't match, frustration can happen. You feel too fast. They feel too slow. Or the opposite. But instead of creating distance, we started adjusting. I learned to slow down. To pause. To listen more carefully. They learned to move a little faster. To adapt. To meet me halfway. That balance? It doesn't come from effort alone. It comes from intention. From wanting to understand. And that's when I realized something important. Learning English is not about becoming someone else. It's about expanding who you are. Adding new ways to express yourself. New ways to connect. Love works the same way. It doesn't erase your differences. It teaches you how to live with them. Respect them. Even appreciate them. But of course, it wasn't always smooth. There were moments of confusion. Moments where I felt the gap again. Moments where I wondered, are we just ignoring something important? Because deep down, I knew. This journey wasn't just about us anymore. It was growing. Becoming more real. More visible. More difficult to hide. And with that growth came a new kind of pressure. Not from strangers this time. But from something closer. Something more personal. Because when you build something meaningful, Eventually, you have to share it with people who know you, people who care about you, people who have expectations. And expectations? They can be heavy, especially when they don't match your reality. One evening, as we were sitting quietly, I said something that surprised even me. I think I am changing. They looked at me. Yes, they said softly. You are. Not just my English. Not just my confidence. Something deeper. The way I see things. The way I feel things. The way I decide what matters. And that change? It felt exciting. But also, a little scary. Because change always brings consequences. You can't grow without leaving something behind. Old beliefs. Old fears. Old definitions. And I wasn't sure yet what I was ready to let go of. Because the next step would ask more from me. More honesty. More courage. More clarity. And this time, it wouldn't be just about learning. It would be about choosing. Choosing what to keep. Choosing what to risk. Because soon, I would have to face the people who knew me best. And their reactions? They wouldn't be as calm. They wouldn't be as patient. They wouldn't just listen. They would question. They would doubt. They might even try to stop me. And that's when everything I learned so far would truly be tested. Family reactions. Have you ever rehearsed a conversation in your head 100 times and still felt completely unprepared when it actually happened? Not because you didn't know what to say, but because you didn't know how it would be received. That was me, the day I decided to tell my family. Up until now, everything felt contained. A coffee shop. A few walks. Simple conversations in slow English. A connection that was growing quietly, without interference. But real life doesn't stay private forever. At some point, the people who know you best become part of the story. And that's where things get complicated. Because strangers can judge you, and you can ignore them. But family? Their opinions stay with you. Even when you try not to listen. I remember sitting in my room, phone in my hand, staring at the screen. My reflection looked back at me. Same face. Same person. But inside? Something had changed. I wasn't just someone learning English in America anymore. I was someone about to defend a choice I didn't fully understand yet. That's the hardest kind of decision. When you feel something strongly, but you don't have perfect words to explain it. Especially in a second language. Especially when emotions are involved. I opened the call. The ringing sound felt louder than usual. Every second stretched longer. And when they answered, everything I practiced disappeared. Hello? That familiar voice. Warm. Concerned. Real. Hi. I want to tell you something, I said. Slow. Careful. Already nervous. What happened? That question. Simple. But full of expectation. And suddenly, I felt like I was about to disappoint them. Not because I did something wrong. But because I did something unexpected. I'd met someone, I said. A pause. Not long. But enough to feel. Oh, really? They replied. A mix of curiosity and caution. Yes, we talk a lot, I continued. Another pause. Then the question I knew was coming. Who is this person? And there it was. The moment where everything becomes real. Not just for you. For them too. I tried to explain. Simple English. Clear words. No hiding. They are kind, patient, help me with English, we meet often. That part was easy. That part made sense. But then, the part one couldn't avoid anymore. They are older than me. Silence. Not the comfortable silence from the coffee shop. This one felt different. Heavy. Full. Waiting. How much older? They asked. I hesitated. My heart started racing again. Just like the first time I tried to order coffee. But this time, it wasn't about pronunciation. It was about truth. I said the number. And everything changed. You can feel it. Even through a phone call. Energy shifts. Tone changes. Breathing pauses. That's a big difference, they said slowly. Not angry. Not loud. But not comfortable either. And that reaction? It hurt more than I expected. Because when someone you love hesitates, it feels like doubt. Even if they don't say it directly. I tried to explain. They are good, we talk. I feel comfortable. My sentences were simple. But my feelings were complex. And that's the problem. When your language is limited, your emotions feel trapped. You can't fully express what you feel. So what comes out sounds smaller than it really is. And that creates misunderstanding. They asked more questions. Why this person? Do you think this is serious? Have you thought about the future? Each question felt like pressure. Not unfair. Not wrong. But heavy. Because I didn't have clear answers. Not yet. And here's something important. Family doesn't always try to control you. Sometimes, they're just trying to protect you. From pain. From mistakes. From things they don't understand. But sometimes I repeated myself. Trying to find the right words. Trying to explain something I was still learning myself. I don't know everything, but I feel something real, I said. That sentence felt honest. But also incomplete. Because what is real? How do you prove it? How do you explain it, especially in a language that still feels new? They sighed. Not loudly. Just enough for me to hear. I'm worried, they said. That word stayed with me. Not angry. Not disappointed. Worried. And suddenly, I saw things from their perspective. They weren't judging me. They were imagining my future. A future they couldn't clearly see. A future that didn't match what they expected for me. And that mismatch created fear. Because expectations are powerful. We grow up with them. We build our identity around them. And when we step outside those expectations, even the people who love us most can feel lost. We ended the call without a conclusion. No agreement. No decision. Just uncertainty. I just want you to be careful, they said. I will, I replied. But inside, I wasn't sure what careful meant anymore. Avoid the situation? Or understand it more deeply? I sat there for a long time after the call ended. Thinking. Replaying every word. Every reaction. Trying to measure my feelings against their concerns. And that's when doubt started to grow again. Not from strangers. Not from society. But from someone who knew me and cared about me. That kind of doubt is harder to ignore. Because it feels personal. It feels real. The next time we met at the coffee shop, I wasn't the same. Something inside me was heavier. More cautious. More aware of consequences. They noticed immediately. You look serious, they said. I talked to my family, I replied. They nodded. And? I paused. Took a breath. They are worried. Not angry. Not rejecting. But not supportive either. And that space in between? It's uncomfortable. Because you don't know where you stand. You don't know what comes next. They listened quietly. No interruption. No quick response. Then they said something simple. That's normal. Normal. That word again. It showed up in so many ways. But this time, it felt different. Because nothing about this situation felt normal to me anymore. And yet, maybe it was. Maybe this is what real life looks like. Not clear answers. Not perfect support. Just people trying to understand from different perspectives. I don't want to hurt them, I said. And you don't want to hurt yourself, they replied. That sentence hit deep. Because it revealed the real conflict. Not between me and my family. But inside me. Two desires. Both valid. Both important. And not easy to balance. That's when I realized something. This journey was no longer just about learning English. Or even about connection. It was about responsibility. To myself. To others. To the choices I make. And the consequences that come with them. Because every decision has a cost. Even the ones that feel right. And now, I was standing at a point where I couldn't stay neutral anymore. I couldn't just observe. I couldn't just learn. I had to decide how far I was willing to go. How much I was willing to risk. And whether this connection was strong enough to face what was coming next. Because family concern was only the beginning. The real test? It hadn't arrived yet. And when it did, it would push everything to the limit. My confidence. My beliefs. And everything I thought I understood about love. Almost giving up. Have you ever been so close to something meaningful, and still felt like walking away? Not because it was wrong. But because it was hard. That's where I found myself. Not at the beginning. Not in the excitement. But in that quiet middle, where things stop feeling new and start feeling real. After the conversation with my family, something shifted inside me. Not suddenly. Not dramatically. But slowly, like a small crack spreading through glass. At first, I tried to ignore it. I kept going to the coffee shop. Kept having conversations. Kept practicing my English. From the outside, everything looked the same. But inside? It wasn't. Every sentence felt heavier. Every pause felt longer. Every moment carried a question. Is this worth it? That question followed me everywhere. And the more I tried to answer it, the more confused I became. Because the truth is, when something matters, the answer is never simple. One afternoon, I didn't go to the coffee shop. Not because I was busy. Not because I forgot. But because I didn't want to face the situation. Avoidance. That old habit again. Psychologists say avoidance gives you short-term relief, but increases long-term anxiety. And that's exactly what happened. At first, it felt easier. No pressure. No questions. No emotional weight. But as the day went on, something felt missing. Not dramatic. Just quiet. Like a conversation that didn't happen. Like a word that stayed unspoken. And that silence? It was louder than I expected. The next day, I went again. They were there. Same place. Same calm presence. But something was different. You didn't come yesterday, they said. Not accusing. Not upset. Just noticing. I was tired, I replied. That word again. Tired. It's the easiest excuse. Because it hides everything. Physical tiredness. Emotional confusion. Mental overload. All in one simple word. They nodded. But they didn't push. And somehow, that made it harder. Because when someone doesn't force you to explain, you start wanting to explain. But I didn't. Not yet. Instead, we talked about simple things. Safe topics. Weather. Food. Daily routines. But the connection felt weaker. Not broken. Just distant. Like we were both aware of something, but not addressing it. And that unspoken space? It grows. If you don't fill it with honesty, it fills itself with doubt. A few days passed like that. Conversations became shorter. Less natural. More careful. And slowly, I started thinking something dangerous. Maybe this is a sign. Maybe this is not meant to continue. Maybe I should stop before it becomes more complicated. That's how the mind protects you. It creates logical reasons to escape emotional discomfort. And those reasons sound convincing. Very convincing. Because they mix truth with fear. Yes, the situation was complicated. Yes, there were risks. Yes, there were questions without answers. But the conclusion? Give up. That part came from fear. Not clarity. But when you're inside the situation, it's hard to see the difference. One evening, I sat alone again. Same room. Same silence. But this time, I didn't distract myself. No phone. No videos. Just thinking. And I asked myself a different question. Not, is this worth it? But, what am I really afraid of? That question felt uncomfortable. Because it required honesty. Not logic. Not excuses. Just truth. And slowly, the answers started to appear. I'm afraid of being judged. I'm afraid of making a mistake. I'm afraid of hurting my family. I'm afraid this won't last. All valid fears. All real. But then another question came. Quiet. but powerful. Am I also afraid of something good? That question stopped me. Because sometimes, we don't just fear failure. We fear success. We fear connection. We fear change. Because change means leaving something behind. Old beliefs. Old identity. Old comfort zones. And I realized something important. If I walked away now, I wouldn't just lose this connection. I would lose the version of myself I was becoming. More open. More honest. More willing to face uncertainty. And that version? I didn't want to lose it. The next time we met, I didn't pretend. I didn't hide. I think. I almost stopped coming, I said. They looked at me. Calm. Present. Why, they asked. Simple question. But this time, I answered differently. I feel scared, I said. Not tired. Not busy. Scared. That word felt more real. More accurate. More honest. They nodded slowly. Yes. I understand, they said. No judgment. No surprise. Just understanding. And that understanding created space again. Space to continue. Space to breathe. Space to be imperfect. I don't know what to do, I added. And that sentence? It felt like freedom. Because admitting you don't know removes pressure. You don't need to have all the answers. You just need to keep going. One step at a time. They leaned back slightly. Thought for a moment. Then said something that changed everything. You don't need to decide everything now, but you need to be honest about what you feel. Honest. That word kept returning. Because it's simple. But not easy. Being honest means accepting your emotions. Even when they're confusing. Even when they don't match expectations. Even when they create problems. But honesty also creates clarity. And clarity is what I was missing. We sat there for a while. Not talking much. But the silence felt different again. Not heavy. Not distant. Just present. And in that quiet moment, I made a small decision. Not a big one. Not final. Just enough. I will not run away, I said quietly. They looked at me. Didn't say anything immediately. Just nodded. That nod felt like support. Not pressure. Not expectation. Just acknowledgement. And that was enough. Because sometimes, you don't need a perfect plan. You just need a clear next step. And my next step was simple. Stay. Continue. Learn. Not just English. Not just about them. But about myself. Because the truth is, almost giving up is part of every meaningful journey. It's the moment where you decide whether something matters enough to continue. And I hadn't fully decided yet. But I knew one thing. I wasn't ready to end this story. Not here. Not like this. Because something inside me still believed there was more to understand. More to feel. More to discover. And that belief? It was small. But strong enough to keep me moving forward. Because the next step wouldn't just test my fear. It would test my courage. In a way I didn't expect. Because soon, life would ask a bigger question. Not about feelings. Not about fear. But about commitment. And that's where everything would change again. A simple turning point. Have you ever had a moment so small that no one else would notice it, but it quietly changes everything inside you? Not a big decision. Not a dramatic speech. Just one simple moment that shifts how you see the world. That's what happened to me. And honestly, if you were standing there, you might not even realize it mattered. But for me, it was the turning point. After everything, the doubts, the family pressure, the almost giving up, I didn't suddenly become confident. I didn't suddenly have all the answers. I was still confused. Still learning. Still afraid, just a little less than before. We were at the coffee shop again. Same place. Same table. But this time, something felt different. Not tense. Not heavy. Just quieter. Like both of us understood that we had reached a moment where something needed to change. Not everything. Just something. We ordered coffee. Sat down. And for a few minutes, we didn't talk. Not because we had nothing to say. But because silence felt more honest than small talk. Then, something unexpected happened. A woman walked into the shop. She looked around, clearly a bit lost. She approached the counter, tried to order, but her English was very limited. I recognized that feeling immediately. The hesitation. The broken sentences. The nervous smile. It was me, not long ago. The cashier looked confused. The line behind her started growing. People shifted impatiently. That familiar pressure started building in the room. And suddenly, without thinking too much, I stood up, walked over, and said, "Hi, do you need help?" My voice was still not perfect. But it was clear. She looked relieved. "Yes. I don't understand menu," she said. I smiled. "I help you." And just like that, something changed. I started explaining. Slow English. Simple words. Pointing at pictures. This is chicken, this is beef, this one is spicy, this one is sweet. She nodded. Asked questions. I answered. Not perfectly. Not smoothly. But enough. Enough to communicate. Enough to help. Enough to connect. And in that moment, I forgot about fear. I forgot about judgment. I forgot about the age gap. I forgot about everything that had been holding me back. Because I was focused on something simple. Helping someone else. Psychologists call this a shift in attention. When you focus on others instead of yourself, your anxiety decreases. Your brain stops analyzing your performance and starts engaging naturally. In simple words, you stop worrying and start living. The order was complete. She thanked me. "Thank you so much," she said. "You're welcome," I replied. Simple exchange. But it felt powerful. I went back to the table. Sat down. And suddenly, everything felt different. Not outside. Inside. They looked at me. Smiling. "That was good," they said. I laughed a little. I didn't think. I can do that, I replied. But I just did. Without planning. Without overthinking. Without fear stopping me. And that's when the realization hit. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just clear. I wasn't the same person anymore. Not because my English was perfect. But because I was using it. In real life. With real purpose. And if I could do that. What else was I underestimating? What else was I afraid of, that I didn't need to be? That moment didn't just change how I saw my English. It changed how I saw everything. Because the same pattern was there. Fear. Doubt. Overthinking. Avoidance. And then. Action. Simple action. Honest action. And suddenly, things became possible. I think. I always wait to feel ready, I said slowly. They nodded. Yes, many people wait, they replied. But, ready never comes. Ready never comes. That sentence stayed with me. Because it applies to everything. Learning English. Starting something new. Even love. You don't wait until you are ready. You act, and readiness follows. That's the real order. Not the one we imagine. And suddenly, all my previous questions started to look different. Is this worth it? Is this okay? Will this work? Maybe those questions were too big. Too heavy. Too focused on the future. What if the real question was simpler? What can I do, right now? Right now, I could talk. Right now, I could learn. Right now, I could understand a little more. And that was enough. We stayed there longer than usual. Talking. Reflecting. But the energy had changed. It felt lighter. Not because the problems disappeared. But because I was no longer avoiding them. I was facing them. In small ways. In real ways. Before leaving, they said something I didn't expect. You see, you are stronger than you think. Stronger. I never used that word to describe myself. Not in English. Not in life. But maybe. Strength isn't about confidence. Maybe it's about continuing, even when you feel unsure. That night, I didn't feel confused. I didn't feel afraid. I didn't feel pressured. I felt clear. Not about everything. But about one thing. I didn't want to run away anymore. Not from English. Not from connection. Not from this story. Because for the first time, I wasn't asking, what if this goes wrong? I was asking, what if this is right? And that question? It felt different. It felt open. It felt possible. But here's the truth. A turning point doesn't solve everything. It just changes your direction. And direction matters. Because it determines where you go next. And where I was going was not easy. Because the next step wasn't about small actions anymore. It was about building something real. Something visible. Something that others couldn't ignore. A life. Together. And building a life? That requires more than courage. It requires commitment. Responsibility. And decisions that affect more than just you. Because soon, this connection would move beyond conversations. Beyond coffee shops. Beyond simple moments. Into something bigger. Something permanent. Something that would test everything I thought I understood. About love. About difference. About what it truly means to stay. Building a life together. Have you ever realized that the moment something becomes real is also the moment it becomes difficult to ignore? Not in your thoughts. Not in your feelings. But in your daily life. That's where everything changed for me. Because up until this point, our story lived in small spaces. A coffee shop. A quiet walk. Simple conversations in slow English. Moments you can step into and step out of. But life doesn't stay in small spaces. Eventually, it expands. And when it does, it asks a question you can't avoid anymore. Are you just passing through this, or are you building something? That question doesn't come with pressure at first. It comes quietly. In small decisions. Like, do we meet again tomorrow? Do we spend more time together? Do we include each other in our daily routines? And slowly, those small decisions become patterns. And patterns? They become life. That's how it started. Without a big conversation. Without a clear agreement. Just consistency. We started seeing each other more often. Not just in the coffee shop. Outside. In normal places. Real places. We went grocery shopping together. At first, it felt simple. Just walking through aisles. Looking at products. But even that became a lesson. Which one do you like? They asked. I'm not sure, maybe this, I replied. We laughed at small things. Misunderstood labels. Different food preferences. Different habits. They took more time choosing. I moved faster. That difference again. Two rhythms. But instead of frustration, we started adjusting. They slowed me down. I helped speed things up. And somewhere in between, we found balance. That's how life together begins. Not with big promises, but with small adjustments. Another day, we cooked together. Simple meal. Nothing special. But everything felt new. Cut like this, they said, showing me. I tried. Not perfect. But improving. Just like my English. And suddenly, I realized something. Life with someone is just like learning a language. You don't get it right immediately. You make mistakes. You correct them. You learn patterns. You improve over time. And most importantly, you need practice. Daily practice. Real practice. Because theory doesn't build connection. Experience does. We started sharing more. Stories. Memories. Opinions. Not just surface-level topics anymore. Deeper things. I was different when I was younger, they said one day. How? I asked. More impatient, less understanding. That surprised me. Because I always saw them as calm. Patient. Grounded. But that sentence reminded me of something important. People change. Growth is not limited by age. And suddenly, the gap I was so focused on started to look different. Not smaller, but less fixed. Because if people can grow, then difference is not just distance. It's also potential. Potential to learn, to adapt, to understand. And that idea changed how I saw us. We weren't two people stuck in different generations. We were two people meeting, somewhere in the middle. And that middle? It's not perfect. But it's real. Of course. Not everything was easy. There were moments of tension. Small disagreements. Misunderstandings. Sometimes, because of language. Sometimes, because of perspective. One evening, we had a small argument. Not loud. Not dramatic. But enough to feel. I think you don't understand me, I said. I try, but sometimes it's hard, they replied. That honesty. It hurt a little. But it was true. Understanding takes effort. And effort can feel exhausting. Especially when differences are constant. But instead of avoiding it, we talked. Slowly. Carefully. I want to understand better, I said. And I want to explain better, they replied. That moment mattered. Because instead of seeing the difference as a problem, we saw it as something to work on. Together. That's when I realized something deeper. Building a life is not about avoiding problems. It's about choosing to face them with the same person. And that choice? It's not easy. Because every day you have an option. Stay. Or leave. Continue. Or stop. And staying? It requires intention. Not just feeling. Not just attraction. But decision. Daily decision. One night, we sat quietly after dinner. No TV. No distractions. Just silence. Comfortable silence. And then they said something unexpected. Do you think we are building something? That question felt different from all the others. Because it wasn't about doubt. It was about awareness. I paused. Thought for a moment. And answered honestly. Yes. I think we are. Not perfect. Not clear. But real. They nodded. That's important, they said. Important. That word stayed with me. Because it meant this wasn't temporary anymore. This wasn't just a phase. This was becoming part of my life. And life requires more than curiosity. It requires responsibility. Because when you build something with someone, your choices affect them. Their choices affect you. And suddenly, everything carries more weight. Not in a negative way. In a meaningful way. I started thinking about the future. Not in detail. But in direction. Where is this going? What does this become? And those questions. They didn't scare me like before. They felt necessary. Because growth always leads to the same point. You can't stay in the middle forever. Eventually, you move forward. Or you move away. And I knew. I wasn't moving away. Not anymore. Because somewhere between the coffee shop conversations, the awkward English sentences, the doubts, the fear, and the small turning point, something real had formed. Something I didn't want to lose. But here's the truth. Building a life together doesn't mean everything becomes easier. Sometimes it makes things harder. Because now, it's not just about you. It's about shared reality. Shared future. Shared consequences. And those consequences? They were about to become very real. Because the next step would introduce something new. Something that changes everything in a deeper way. Something that brings meaning. But also responsibility. Because soon, we wouldn't just be building a life. We would be creating one. And that changes everything. When everything changes. Have you ever noticed that life doesn't always change slowly? Sometimes, it shifts in a single moment. One sentence. One realization. One piece of news that quietly rewrites everything you thought you understood. That's what happened next. And no matter how prepared you think you are, there are moments that still catch you off guard. Up until now, we were building something. Carefully. Slowly. Learning each other. Adjusting. Growing. It wasn't perfect. But it was stable. Predictable in its own way. And maybe that's why I didn't expect what came next. Because when things feel stable, you stop bracing for impact. It started like any other day. Nothing special. We were at home. Doing simple things. Talking about nothing important. The kind of normal day that feels almost invisible. And then, they said it. Not dramatically. Not with tension. Just, calmly. I need to tell you something. That sentence. It always changes the air. You can feel it immediately. Something is about to shift. Your mind starts racing. What is it? Is something wrong? Did I miss something? I looked at them. Waiting. Trying to stay calm. But already feeling that quiet pressure building inside. They paused for a moment. Took a breath. And then said, I've been thinking about our future. Future. That word again. But this time, it felt heavier. More real. More immediate. I nodded slowly. Okay, I said. Not sure where this was going. Not sure if I was ready to hear it. I don't want this to stay uncertain, they continued. I don't want to keep wondering what this is. Their voice was steady. Clear. And that made it even more serious. Because this wasn't emotion speaking. It was decision. And decisions? They require responses. Not avoidance. Not delay. Real answers. I think we need to decide what we're building, they said. And just like that, the moment I had been slowly approaching was suddenly right in front of me. No more distance. No more time to figure it out later. Now. Right now. That's when fear came back. Not the same fear as before. Not about English. Not about fitting in. But something deeper. What if I make the wrong choice? What if I'm not ready? What if this is too much? Because deciding means committing. And committing means you don't get to stay in the middle anymore. I stayed quiet. Thinking. Feeling. Trying to understand what I truly wanted. Not what was easy. Not what was safe. But what was real. They didn't rush me. They just waited. And that patience It gave me space. Space to be honest. I'm still learning everything, I said slowly. About life here, about us, about myself. They nodded. I know, they replied. But learning doesn't stop when you decide. That sentence hit differently. Because I always thought I needed to feel ready first. Like there was a moment where everything would make sense. And then I could choose. But maybe that moment doesn't exist. Maybe clarity comes after commitment. Not before. I don't expect perfection, they continued. I just want honesty. Honesty. Simple word. But not always easy. Because honesty requires courage. It requires you to face your own uncertainty. And speak it out loud. I'm afraid, I admitted. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just, truthfully. I know, they said. And I am too. That surprised me. Because I always saw them as strong. Certain. But in that moment, they were just as human as I was. Just as unsure. Just as vulnerable. And suddenly, it didn't feel like I was facing something alone. We were both standing at the same edge. Looking forward. Not knowing exactly what would happen. But knowing that standing still wasn't an option anymore. Then maybe we decide together, I said. The words came out slowly. But they felt right. Not perfect. But real. They smiled. Not a big smile. Just a small one. But it carried something important. Relief. Connection. Understanding. Together, they repeated. And just like that. Something shifted. Not everything. But enough. Because we moved from uncertainty. To intention. From what is this? To what are we choosing? And that choice? It doesn't solve every problem. It doesn't remove every fear. But it gives direction. And direction changes everything. From that day, things felt different. More serious. More grounded. We talked about practical things. Living arrangements. Plans. Responsibilities. Not romantic topics. Not exciting ones. But real ones. Because real life isn't built on feelings alone. It's built on structure. Consistency. Shared effort. And the more we talked, the more I realized something. This wasn't just about love. It was about building a future. A real one. With consequences. With responsibilities. With changes that would affect both of us deeply. And honestly, that realization was both exciting and terrifying. Because the next step wasn't small anymore. It wasn't just about spending more time together. It was about creating something new. Something that would tie our lives together in a way that couldn't be easily undone. And that kind of step? It requires more than emotion. It requires readiness to grow. To adapt. To face challenges you can't fully predict. Because when life changes, it doesn't ask if you're comfortable. It asks if you're willing. And I was starting to understand something important. Willingness matters more than certainty. Because certainty is rare. But willingness? That's a choice. And I was choosing to stay. To try. To build. But here's the truth. Every big decision creates a new reality. And that new reality? It brings new challenges. Challenges you can't see until you're already inside them. And what came next was something I never fully prepared for. Something that would test not just our connection, but our strength, our patience, our ability to handle something bigger than both of us. Because soon, life wouldn't just change emotionally. It would change physically, visibly, in a way that no one could ignore. And once that happens, there's no going back to simple anymore. A new life begins. Have you ever felt like everything you've been building quietly suddenly becomes real in a way you can't hide anymore? Not just in your heart, not just in your thoughts, but in your daily life in a way that everyone can see. That's when you realize there's no more maybe, only now. That's where our story changed again. Because everything we had been talking about, all the questions, all the decisions, all the what-ifs, they were about to become something real. Something visible. Something that would redefine everything. It started with something small. Something easy to ignore. At first, I felt tired more often. Not the usual kind of tired. Not from work. Not from thinking too much. This was different. Quiet. Persistent. Like my body was trying to tell me something, but not loudly enough for me to understand. I think I'm just stressed, I told myself. And honestly, that made sense. New country. New life. New responsibilities. Of course I was tired. But then, other small changes started to appear. Nothing dramatic. Just different. My appetite changed. My energy shifted. Even my emotions felt slightly unfamiliar. I was more sensitive. More aware. More present. And that's when a quiet thought entered my mind. Not strong. Not certain. Just there. What if? I didn't say it out loud. Not yet. Because some thoughts feel too big to speak before you understand them. So I waited. Observed. Tried to find a logical explanation. But deep down, I already knew. There are moments in life when your body understands before your mind accepts. And this was one of them. A few days later, I couldn't ignore it anymore. I sat down, took a deep breath, and finally said it. I think something is different. They looked at me. Concerned, but calm. What do you mean? They asked. I hesitated. Not because I didn't know, but because saying it would make it real. And once something is real, you can't take it back. I think I might be pregnant. Silence. Not empty silence. Heavy silence. The kind that holds 1,000 thoughts at once. They didn't react immediately. Not because they didn't care, but because they understood the weight of that moment. Because that sentence? It changes everything. Your plans. Your priorities. Your identity. Your future. Everything. Are you sure? They asked gently. No, not yet, I replied. But I feel it. Feel. That word again. Not proof. Not certainty. But something deeper. Something instinctive. We decided to check. Simple step. Logical step. But somehow, it felt like the biggest step we had ever taken. Because this wasn't just about information. It was about confirmation. And confirmation transforms possibility into reality. I remember holding the test. Looking at it. Like it held the answer to a question I wasn't fully ready to ask. My hands were steady. But inside, everything was moving. Fast. What if it's positive? What if it's not? What do I want it to be? And that last question. It surprised me. Because for the first time, I wasn't just afraid. I was also curious. Hopeful. And that feeling? It changed everything. We waited. Those few minutes. They felt longer than anything before. Because waiting for a result is not just about time. It's about facing the unknown. And then, there it was. Clear. Simple. Undeniable. Positive. No confusion. No doubt. Just truth. I looked at it. Then at them. And in that moment, everything slowed down. Not because time stopped, but because my mind needed space to understand what had just happened. We're going to have a baby, I said quietly. Even saying it felt unreal. Like words that belonged to someone else's story. But no. This was ours. They didn't say anything at first. They just looked at me. And then, they smiled. Not a big, loud smile. But a deep one. The kind that comes from something real. Something meaningful. We are, they said. And just like that, our life changed. Not in theory. Not in imagination. But in reality. Because from that moment on, everything had a new center. Not just us anymore. But something growing. Something depending on us. Something that would bring both joy and responsibility. And suddenly, all the questions from before. They didn't disappear. But they shifted. Because now, the focus wasn't, is this relationship okay? It became, how do we build a life for this child? That shift? It's powerful. Because it moves you from self-focus to purpose. And purpose changes how you think, how you act, how you decide. We started talking differently, planning differently, even seeing the world differently. Small things mattered more. Time felt more valuable. Choices felt more important. Because now, every decision had a consequence beyond us. I didn't expect this, I admitted one night. Neither did I, they replied. But I'm glad it happened. Glad. That word stayed with me. Because it wasn't denial. It wasn't fear. It was acceptance. And maybe even happiness. And I realized something important. Life doesn't always follow your plan. But sometimes, it gives you something you didn't know you needed. And that doesn't mean it's easy. Because this new reality? It came with challenges. Real ones. Physical changes. Emotional shifts. External pressure. People's opinions. Doubts. questions. Everything became more intense. Because now, this wasn't just our story anymore. It was a story that others would see, judge, question, and sometimes misunderstand. But for the first time, that didn't scare me the same way. Because I wasn't alone. We weren't alone. And most importantly, there was something worth protecting. Something worth building for. Something worth staying strong for. A new life. And that changes everything. Because when life begins, so does a new version of you. Not instantly. Not perfectly. But gradually. Through every decision. Every challenge. Every moment of growth. And I knew. This was just the beginning. Because the next chapter? It wouldn't just test our relationship. It would test who we are as people. As partners. As parents. And not everything would be easy. Not everything would be clear. But one thing was certain. There was no going back to who we were before. Only forward. Into something bigger. Something more real. Something that would change us. In ways we couldn't fully understand yet. What if the moment you thought would break you is actually the moment that builds you into someone you've never been before? Not stronger overnight. Not fearless. But real. Because this story was never just about learning English in America. It was never just about culture shock, awkward conversations, or feeling lost in a new country. It was about something deeper. It was about finding your voice when you feel like you've lost it. It was about choosing to stay when leaving feels easier. It was about connection in a world full of differences. And most importantly, it was about becoming someone who doesn't run away from life anymore. From the first moment of silence. To the confusion, the fear. The judgment. To the quiet turning point. To building something real. To creating a new life. Every step carried one question. Do you keep going, or do you give up? And if you've watched this far, maybe that question isn't just part of my story. Maybe it's part of yours too. Because let's be honest. There are days when you feel tired. Days when nothing makes sense. Days when you question everything you started. And in those moments, you don't need perfect answers. You just need one reason to keep going. So here's the truth no one tells you. You don't become confident first. You don't become ready first. You choose first. And then you grow into that choice. That's how everything in this story happened. Not because it was easy. Not because it was perfect. But because I didn't stop. And now the story isn't ending. It's evolving. Because what comes next? It's not just about love anymore. It's not just about survival. It's about responsibility, growth, and becoming the kind of person someone else can depend on. And trust me, that journey? It's even harder. But also more meaningful than anything before. So if you're still here, watching this, I want to ask you one simple question. What is one thing in your life right now that you're about to give up on? And what would happen if you didn't? If this story made you feel something, even just a little, don't let that feeling disappear. Because the next chapter might be exactly what you need to hear. Subscribe now if you want real stories about learning English, life in America, relationships, and personal growth, told in a way that actually connects with you. Like this video to support more meaningful content. Comment below, where are you in your journey right now? Turn on notifications so you don't miss what comes next. Because this isn't just a story. It's a reminder that no matter how lost you feel, you're still moving forward. And sometimes, that's more than enough. See you in the next chapter.